Doctors of Reddit, what are the most memorable last words you've ever heard from a patient? Not his last words, but his last dad joke. My father's doctor, I'm afraid you'll die soon. My father, oh I can live with that. Not a doctor, but a paramedic who has heard too many last words. And these are rarely what you see in movies, where the patient says something then peacefully and quickly dies. Lots of mine have been just before going into cardiac or respiratory arrest, or just deteriorating in general. It's long-winded and painful to watch. This really ducking hurts. A 22-year-old kid who flew off his motorbike after being hit by a lorry. He went into shock afterwards, and we couldn't get him back. This was back when I was a student, and even though it's quite a humorous last sentence, it still kinda haunts me. I'm glad my wife didn't have to find my body. An elderly gent who suffered global 3rd/4th degree burns. He had fallen asleep while making him and his wife lunch. Massive fire ensured. This one still hurts to think about. Something I find really interesting is the sort of phenomenon of impending doom. The amount of patients I've had with myocardial infarction, heart attack, AAA ruptures etc. whose last words, or at least one of their last sentences have been I think I'm going to die. When you see a patient who basically looks like sheet, sweaty and pale, and they tell you they think they're going to die. You lisp because they probably are. My grandmother's last words, spoken as a nurse was checking on her and accidentally woke her up was, "Good God, you scared the shit out of me." She went back to sleep and never woke up. Passed about a week later. The last words I ever heard my dad speak were on the phone, Thanksgiving night. As we were about to hang up he stopped me and took a really long pause before telling me he loved me. He started crying as he was saying it, apologizing for not being able to be with me on Thanksgiving. He lived far away, and he told me to hug my mother for him. The next morning he died of a heart attack in his sleep. Sometimes I wonder if he knew he was going to die somehow. Thanks, Reddit, you made me cry again. I'm not a doctor, but a nurse, and I've worked with the elderly for quite some time now. Most have been silent in their last moments. One old man sighed out finally and went on. He just looked so relieved to finally die. One lady with severe dementia kinda had no idea what was going on. She was pretty out of it, and her last words were that she missed her mommy and that she hoped mom would bake bread, cause she was hungry. Another lady was absolutely terrified, and I tried my best to calm her down. It's heartbreaking. You can't really do anything with their fear other than calm them as best as you can. The lady asked me will everything be okay, and I told her that, yeah, everything would be fine. The kids were fine, and everything was fine, and her flowers were watered. She didn't say anything after that, and passed on an hour later. I'm not a doctor, but I'm a nurse. I've heard a few final words. One that sticks out to me was a young man 20s who was in a pretty bad car accident. He had lost a leg, and as a result lost so much blood. The last thing he said was pretty much asking his girlfriend if his dog was alright. The dog had been in the car, and according to his dad didn't make it. I cried in my car for a while after that shift. He was so worried about his dog he had no idea how close to death he was. Trying to patch up a young guy to be medevaced, his body was torn to sheet. He was fighting hard to keep going. He was gasping and asking me to teach him how to pray. Hearing that changed me as a person. I've been a lot colder since that. I'm a nurse. It was just after breakfast. My patient was a little old lady who had been on the ward for ages, but could never remember my name and always called me Matt. She had a cardiac arrest in front of me. We started CPR and defibed her, and in the only time I have ever seen this happen in a cardiac arrest, she immediately regained consciousness. She looked directly at me and addressed me by my actual name and said, "Alex, I think it was the veg on my toast." She then promptly vomited and lost consciousness again, and we could not get her back. It is to date one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. Nurse here. I'll never forget her. I'd been in nursing for around 6 months. It was near the beginning of my shift. I'd just finished introducing myself to my new group of patients. One of my patients called me and said, "Get my daughter out of the room. It is time for me to die." I was very confused by this at first. I had just gotten out of her room not long ago and met the patient and her daughter, and we got to joke around a bit, and she'd just gotten up and walked. The report had gotten on her gave no real indication that she was unstable. I went to go see her. The daughter was just walking out of the room and I asked what was going on. The daughter was like she's telling me to leave and saying it's time for her to die. She's not used to being in a hospital, so I'm sure she's just being hysterical. I told the daughter I would go check on her. She did not respond to me and had no pulse, and we could not bring her back. It was so sudden for everyone. The family and staff and I were not expecting this. From the small amount of time I'd met her, this woman was a real joy, and it was obvious that she was loved and respected by all who knew her. Us nurses and the family all had a cry together. I think about her last words and wonder how long she knew. She did not sound fearful, just said it with a voice that said that she knew it was time. Nurse here. One that's always stuck with me. Had a patient I was helping another nurse care for. Patient had messed themselves, and so we had gone into the room to clean them up. Patient halfway joked and talked with us afterward, was doing alright, and had no complaints, so we left the room. Not an hour later, responding to a call light down the hall, the patient's room is on, and as we pass the room, we hear, "Help. Help me. I'm dying." By the time we hit the door, the patient was stone cold gone. No pulse, no breathing. On the positive, the patient was at ENR, so there was nothing else to do. But the look of shock and terror on the patient's face post-mortem was still kind of horrifying. My daughter, a nurse, said the ones who are ready to go are the easiest. She holds their hands and lets them know they aren't alone. The hardest ones are the fighters. One man, in his 70s, kept saying nope, I'm not ready to go, I have a lot of living to do still. When he died later that day, she cried, and one of the nurses said, "Maybe you should rethink a career if you are going to cry." The head nurse told her, No honey, if there ever comes a time you don't cry, well, that's when you need to stop being a nurse. Not last words per SE, but said while my grandmother was in palliative care for cancer. The nurses hand out pictures of a human body, front and back, and ask the patients to circle where it hurts. She circled the buttocks and wrote pain and the ass. She was an amazing woman. Not a doctor, but lost my mother to cancer 3 years ago. Entire family, 4 children and my dad around the bed. My dad and her decided that we should stop the drugs and let her pass as she was in too much pain. There was no last words, but right before she passed, after we took her off the drugs, she opened her eyes and saw her whole family around her bed, with all the love in the world, before she passed away. I know it's not a statement, but knowing she got to see her family with her as her last sight lets me sleep better at night. Miss you, Mom, and will love you forever. 3. Nurse here. We had a chronic patient, a kid, about 6. He was in and out of the hospital for either chemotherapy or series of blood transfusions. He had AML. Over time I had become close to the patient and his family, and I gotta say, I admire the strength of his parents. They were not well off, and we all knew that sooner or later the kid was gonna die. But they pushed through with his treatment. After 3 years, the kid's body couldn't take it any longer. Everyone was in tears, shit, even I was. As he lay in the hospital bed, in between his gasps, he asked his mother, "Ma, will I be seeing Jesus now?" Holding back her sobs, his mother calmly said, "Yes, my little boy." Kid went to sleep, never woke up. I went to the bathroom and cried like a girl. I never got to give the kid the Tom and Jerry DVDs that I promised to give him. Veterinarian here. Different approach to the question. When I was a student, this big tattooed bloke comes in, one word answer kind of guy. He comes in with his Jack Russell, who was elderly and had been treated for a range of problems for a while. Dog was coming in to be put to sleep. Just as the vet was administering the drugs, the man goes, "Remember playing ball?" Dog looked him straight in the face, eyes shining and doggy smiling. Dog slipped away with that happy expression. This big guy then cries and cries, absolutely distraught, hand against the wall, bawling his eyes out. Those final words hit me, and the vet hard. A few tears were shed, to say the least. My nanny lived in a long-term care home for the last bit of her life. Her roommate was always singing, and, God bless her soul, she was awful. So, my nanny was sleeping, and Rose was singing her tune when all of a sudden my nanny woke up and shouted, "Rose, be quiet. Can't you see him trying to die?" She passed 2 days later without saying much more. It made everyone feel better about her death. She was a supremely funny lady. Not a doctor, but I lost my brother a few years ago. His final words broke my heart and are the reason I'm finishing my school. They were, "I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise, and I'm sorry I couldn't make you all proud." This doesn't really count in that I'm not a doctor, and these weren't my dad's last words, but I'm going to tell this story anyway. My dad had been in and out of the hospital quite often for the last few years. He had driven himself to the hospital as he did many times before this day. Only this day he didn't drive home. I got the news on my way to work one morning and went home that weekend to be with family. My grandma, his mom, asked me to go get his van from the hospital, so I did. I got in the van and started it up, and a song started playing on the stereo. He had a Hank Williams CD in. I thought to myself, I wonder what the last song that he ever listened to was. He was a huge music guy, so I hit the back button. The song was "I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive." I cried the whole way back. I don't know if he listened to that song every time he drove to the hospital, or if he just knew this was his time, or if he even expected anyone to do what I did and see what he listened to last. But I like to think it was his last joke for someone to hopefully hear. Well, I heard it, Dad. Hospice doctor here. Still, the best thing I heard has been, if I knew this was going to be the end of my life, I wouldn't have been so nice. I know that sounds bad, but truly, it was an acknowledgement of how we treat our elderly. We don't listen to their wishes. We just do what medicine does. We don't have real conversations. We don't talk about what life for people is like, and then we exclude them from the conversation. I have a hard job, but I love it. You learn how much of your daily BS is not meaningful and not worth worrying about. She just wanted to die, and not for selfish reasons. The only people that talked to her were volunteers and other nice people, but they didn't mean anything to her, and they should not have. There is no connection. I know it sounds weird, but medicine had no place for her. If she got sick, then she went to the hospital. She didn't want to go there, and that should be a personal choice. Just a weird conversation at a time in my life when I was inexperienced. I wish I would have had things to say. Now things are changing, and people are accepting more of a personal choice to not participate in forced medicine. There is a lot of political and healthcare things involved, but just eye-opening to hear a competent, sane person say they don't want to do this anymore. Healthcare is really messed up. Hopefully we will begin to listen more and be less authoritarians.